There was a book a few years ago called Proust Can Change Your Life, a title that was clearly meant to draw in people who had not yet read In Search of Lost Time, because I think that for everyone who has read the book, you know that it does change your life. There's no can about it. It's a novel. It's a great work of what we might call wisdom literature. And it's such a wholly immersive experience that for most people, you come out different from when you first went in. So we only have about 45 minutes, and I have thousands of questions to ask Ben. So my first question is, please tell me about your first experience of reading the book, whenever it was, and how it affected you.
Yes. Memory carries me back to the suburbs of Philadelphia, the autumn of 1972. I was a junior at Haverford College, and I would take the blue bus over to Bryn Mawr, where they had a very good French department. Swarthmore also had a good French department. I took courses there as well. Took at all three schools, but I took a course on the French novel, and that was when I first read just Combray, but in French. And then I guess I read the whole thing through in French and in English both. It was probably in the 90s, and not before the 90s. So there was a long hiatus. And like most people, I imagined I understood what he was getting at on the basis of Swann's Way, which is absolutely wrong. You can't. It's all one novel, and has to be read as such. And the miracle of it is that he seemed to be holding this immense pattern in his head, although it changed radically while he held it there. As a matter of fact, two events, a great love in his life and the First World War, caused him to break open the book, and it accretes from within to more than twice the size it was in 1913 when he thought he imagined he had the whole.
And its effect on you then? Did you think, I'm going to write about this man one day, or this has changed my life? Or
no, I was at the stage.
He's not as good as Henry James? What did you think?
I hope I can eke out a paper on this.
All right. A very honest answer. What can you say? Admirably honest.
I was 20. No.
Oh, fair enough. All right. Next question. I'd like to ask about writing a biography of a man who was famously opposed to the very idea that the biography of an artist was in any way a key to his life, an idea, as I'm sure everyone in this room knows, was made very popular by the work of the powerful critic Sainte-Beuve, to whom Proust stood in complete opposition. I have one little Proust quote, which is, "A book is the product of a different self from the one we manifest in our habits, in society, in our vices." So I have a multi-part question. What did you imagine a biography of Proust would achieve? How did you approach it? And second, and tougher, how did writing the book change the way you feel about the work, if it did?
The first biography I read was George Painter's, which is a very beautifully written book, and was almost universally hailed as a masterpiece. But the more you look into it, the more you realize that although so many of these principles in his life were still alive, he did absolutely no interviews, and the reason was that he thought that In Search of Lost Time, or Remembrance of Things Past, as he would have called it, was an autobiography. It's not. And it is true that the narrator of In Search of Lost Time, as we'll call it, bears notable resemblance to Marcel Proust. But what struck me as more salient was all the differences. Marcel Proust was half Jewish and altogether homosexual. The hero of In Search of Lost Time is neither. Marcel Proust was asthmatic, and the hero of the novel is not. Marcel Proust had a brother, and a very distinguished older brother, a younger brother. The hero of In Search of Lost Time is, as Howard Nemerov once said, the onlyest child who ever lived. I did take to heart the famous lines
Right.
from Contre Sainte-Beuve, where
Right.
he says that the mind that creates is somebody else, not the man who suffers, to use T.S.
Yes.
Eliot's
Right.
opposition. I was helped in this by two great biographers who've come after Painter. They are, I'd like to salute them, Jean-Yves Tadier and William Carter, and also all of us who write about Proust are in debt, including Tadier and Carter. And anyone who writes about Proust is in the greatest debt to Philip Kolb, whose 21 or 22 volume edition of the letters is a miracle of scholarship, surely one of the greatest scholarly feats of all time. At the beginning of every volume, he has an almost week-by-week chronology of what was doing in the life, and also it provides tremendous insight into the metamorphoses of the mind that created, because he didn't begin with his genius. He began with talent and with a genius for conversation and for the presentation of a social persona. And as this wore away, what emerged was the greatest French novelist, to my surprise, given the beginnings, and the people who knew him best. For example, Rinaldo Hahn, who perhaps knew him better than anyone. Rinaldo Hahn, parts of whose diaries can't even be read until 2036, I think it is.
That was shocking when I read
Yes,
that. How much there is still to be discovered at this point about Proust. It's shocking to realize what's unrevealed so far.
Rinaldo Hahn said, the young man that I went on a walking tour with in the west of France showed absolutely no traces of genius.
But that was said by everyone, wasn't it? André Gide famously didn't open the package, or he said he didn't because how could such a person produce a book worth reading? But he did open the package. It's even more damning. He did open the package, and he did start it.
I'm not sure exactly which 3 or 4 sentences he read, but I think he knew that they didn't want to publish it.
Right, just because of who this young man seemed to be.
Yeah, it should be said about Gide that he regarded this as the great error of his life. It's sort of like Natalie Ginsburg rejecting the leopard at Einaudi, and he repented in Dust and Ashes. They were never friends, Gide and Proust, and could never have been friends. And in their respective circles, there were no people, as best I can tell, who were even friends, but on at least one occasion they spent a long evening together talking, and Gide happily went home and wrote down some of what was said. That's the kind of evidence for a biographer that has a very high level of credibility, because people lie either unwittingly or wittingly in memoirs written many years later. But I think very few people lie to their diaries the same night that something happened.
I once did an article on Anais Nin, so we won't talk about that. Sometimes they do,
They do.
But that's all right. That's a sweet thing to think. I thought it would be nice to intersperse questions here and there with a sentence of Ben's that I think is particularly suggestive and strong, and to see if you would care to expand on it. I underlined many, many things in this book. And here is Ben on Proust, the man, sitting down to write, finally, his great book. So this is you. Such years as remained, notwithstanding torments of love, deaths of friends, the all-transforming tragedy of world war, were a solitary emergency consecrated to the darkness and silence of creative imagination. I think that's such a beautiful sentence. Solitary emergency, I confess, makes me think of Frank O'Hara's Meditations in an Emergency, but it's a beautiful phrase about the shutting of the doors, the entombing of himself to write.
Yes, and the conviction that he would not have a long life. And asthma really was not treated. It was, I'm asthmatic myself, but I have all these wonderful medications that I take every day, and there's a kind of Chinese wall between me and all the bad things that can happen. But asthma was treated with these strange medicated cigarettes and incense powders that you would burn and put a cloak over your head and breathe in. In other words, there was no medical response to asthma, and it nearly killed him when he was 9. And anytime he traveled, he had a terrific attack, and these attacks, any one of them could have been fatal. What was additionally dangerous was the bronchitis and the onset of pneumonia, and this indeed was how he died. But he like the narrator of In Search of Lost Time at the matinee of the Princesse de Clermont, he wonders, will there be enough time?
Ah, yes.
Yes.
Yes, yes. Since you bring up illness, I'm going to jump ahead, and you've mentioned the beginning of asthma at age 9 when he nearly died in front of his parents. Here's a little quote, writing in May 1904 to a friend. He said that illness had more and more compelled him, and this is a Proust quote from a letter, to do without nearly everything, and to replace people by their images and life by thought. So my question to you is, how important was being so ill throughout his life to the man that he became? Was it easier to close himself off? Was it a habit of closing himself off?
Well, this really gets to the most mysterious thing, which is the whatever happened in November of 1908 and in the course of 1909, whatever happened creatively was one of the great events in the history of literary creativity. And it seems to me he had a long list of projects, some of which sounded rather dilettantish, and he writes to a friend, I've got the following projects on tap, and he says an essay on Gothic windows and an expose about homosexuality. He adds in parentheses, hard to publish. And amid along with these others, he lists a Parisian novel. I think that the catalytic moment came when he realized that these weren't all separate projects, but one that he could take all roads at once, and that's when the mature book comes into view. You can, when you read Jean Santeuil, the earlier novel, not published until the early 50s, it's an eerie experience. Nobody ever reads Jean Santeuil before reading In Search of Lost Time. Yeah, that's never happened. So you're always thinking, well, oh, that's familiar. Oh, and parts of it are very beautiful. But what he had episodes, the accumulation of scenes, but not the single theme that would drive the masterwork. So all this took shape very quickly, and I hesitate to say that his parents had to have died, particularly the mother, though he did undergo an experience of all but fatal grief. He wrote to a friend, I wanted to kill myself after Maman died, but I dreaded appearing as a suicide in the papers. And as he gradually emerges from this grief, a very magisterial writer is suddenly in the making. There is also the all-important experience of having indentured himself to John Ruskin for a period of 9 years. And this seems to have had a very powerful effect on his understanding, not just his way of writing French, but his understanding of life. And Ruskin is all bound up with his mother because he needed her in order to translate him. Her English was excellent, his was not. And there's a little anecdote from near the end of his life when he fundamentally misunderstands something, it shows how really poor his English must have been. He was quite upset when he saw that the title in English of Du Côté de chez Swann would be Swann's Way, because somebody convinced him, and it didn't take much convincing, that that could only mean the method of Swann's way, not the path by Swann's house. I think without Madame Proust, he could not even have made a start on Ruskin. And without the transforming experience of Ruskin, I don't know how he would have arrived at the mature style.
I'd like to follow you into the idea of his mother. I have really a couple of things to ask you about that. This book is in the Yale Jewish Lives series. His father was Catholic, his mother was Jewish. He did not convert. He was baptized and raised as a Catholic. One description I loved, and I half remember this from Painter, who I read 1,000 years ago also, what was the result of this dual background? He said there was no prepackaged salvation available to him, so he had to find his own. And Ben writes, I think, just as beautifully, and I'd love you to expand on it. Judaism and Christianity, the enemy creeds of Marcel's maternal and paternal ancestors, had beautifully cancelled out in him. He was what he would remain, a congregation of one. And
yes.
Can you talk more about that?
Well, as opposed to André Gide, who had the burden of his inherited Protestantism on him all his life. No received religion meant anything to Proust. People say to me, well, since his mother didn't convert, according to halakhic law, he's technically a Jew. And people say, well, because he was baptized, he's a Catholic. Neither of those facts meant anything to him. Neither ecclesiastical law nor Judaic law meant anything to him. And these traditions were available to him only for their poetry. He certainly was steeped in the Bible, but all writers before our own time were steeped in the Bible. And it's, for me, one of the great attractions, no religious anxieties.
That's very interesting. One more question about his mother, and then I'd like to pursue the religious anxieties. His mother died in September 1903. He wrote the next day, "She takes away my life with her, as Papa had taken away hers." In the book, he gives us, as everyone knows, this tremendous account of the death of his grandmother, the great account of the death of Bourgot, which seems to be really about the immortality of art. But as you point out, the mother and the father in the book neither age nor die. Can you talk a little bit about, because you've written about this beautifully in a book, why you feel this is so? Why the mother is deathless? Why he uses the grandmother's death instead?
They simply depart from the frame of reference of the novel, and this may be unique in multi-generational novels this doesn't happen in Buddenbrooks. This doesn't happen in any other multi-generational novel I can think of. But I think he wanted to get them out of harm's way, get them safe in some transcendental elsewhere where they could be themselves forever, which violates all the canons of realism. I also think, my personal feeling is that he was afraid that writing those scenes would have killed him.
That's what I wanted you to say, because you do say that in the book very beautifully, and it's very moving. Back to the question of religion and what he was or wasn't. The Dreyfus Affair plays a very big part in your book, as it should. It polarized French society. You summarize its appearance in Proust as a contagion laying waste the whole of a society. Proust later said, "I was the first Dreyfusard," which may not have been quite true. But could you please then talk about the Dreyfus Affair, what it meant in French society in the different salons he attended, and what it meant for him to take the stand that he took?
Well, our leading authority on this is in the room, so I say, Louis Begley, and so I say this with the greatest trepidation. But I say, well, a clear-cut case of scapegoating of a Jewish officer. The army had discovered that they had been penetrated. The real traitor's name was Esterhazy, and before this deeply depressing affair is done, there are riots in many French streets between Dreyfusards and anti-Dreyfusards, and then it's over. Dreyfus is reinstated, but out of this comes the movement called Action Française, and so much of the rhetoric. Hannah Arendt makes this point beautifully in The Origins of Totalitarianism. So much of the rhetoric of the Dreyfus Affair serves as a kind of ideological dress rehearsal for greater horrors to come with the fall of the Third Republic. And Proust was instinctively on the right side, but I went into this assuming it was because of some kind of ethnic fellow feeling. Not at all. That really played no role in his feelings. Like his brother, he felt that this was a grotesque miscarriage of justice and was active in the captain's behalf. He wasn't the first Dreyfusard. I don't know, that was perhaps Bernard Lazare or even the brother Mathieu of Captain Dreyfus. But it tore French society apart from top to bottom, and there's one indicative scene in which the narrator has been to a party where nothing else is talked about, because nothing else was talked about for years but the Dreyfus case. And then he comes home from this party in the Faubourg Saint-Germain, and a version of the same arguments is going on between the two butlers in houses. In this way, the affair split French society down the middle. And Madame Verdurin, a thoroughly bad character, really one of the most dynamically bad people you'll meet in fiction, is Dreyfusard, but of course this is just a social calculation for her. A few years later, she's forgotten about the Dreyfus Affair, and it's all wrapped up in the Ballet Russe.
Didn't his father stop speaking to both sons for a couple of weeks?
Oh yes, I forgot to say that. The boys were Dreyfusard. Their father, very distinguished doctor, was instinctively, well, he just felt the army must be right, I suppose.
A lot of people did.
A lot of people did. I'll just say a word about Dr. Adrien Proust. He made this marriage of ambition to a upper middle class Jewish girl. He was a boy from the country, from a little town called Illiers, now called Illiers-Combray. And he had been dispatched because of his epidemiological brilliance to trace the root of previous choleras. And this was, he was one of the people responsible for the cordon sanitaire at Suez that stopped further outbreaks, for which he received I guess it was the Légion d'honneur from the Empress Eugénie herself in the Tuileries Palace 3 years before Communards blew it up. So this was the world Marcel came from. So many writers come out of backgrounds of obscurity or provincialism or really extreme provincialism, but that wasn't the case with Proust at all. William Faulkner didn't know any real writers until he was a commanding presence himself. Marcel Proust was in touch with the whole of a beau monde, of the world of the Faubourg Saint-Honoré, and of artists and writers and painters, and his modest first book, Les Plaisirs et les Jours carried, an introduction by Anatole France, which ran on the front page of one of the cultural papers. It was he was raised in the lap of high cultivation, which is very unusual, I think.